Well, hello and good afternoon, and welcome back to the office. I pray that you have had a fantastic week as we enter the month of June and a new Bible study. We've completed the last quarter in Romans, and that means we got to do something new. I guess we don't have to, but we're going to. We are going to be in Proverbs first, and then we'll jump into the Song of Songs. So we're going to be into some wisdom from Solomon, and ought to be interesting. We could always use a little bit of wisdom. And when you start looking at wisdom literature and trying to figure out what wisdom is, it always begs the question, what's wisdom? And I know in church you've probably been asked this question many times, but I'm going to ask it again. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Think about that for just a second. And for those of you who have answered it before, you probably come up with some version of an answer of uh, knowledge being part of wisdom, but not necessarily wisdom being part of knowledge. So it sounds something like wisdom is knowledge plus experience, or wisdom is knowledge plus, or wisdom is the godly application of knowledge, or some variation of that definition. The point being is that knowledge is just simply having information, but then wisdom is the application of that. Now, for us as Christians, that means the godly application of that. And for the secular world, that means it's just experience or something like that. But as we study this wisdom literature, meaning Proverbs, and specifically, it definitely brings the idea that we need to apply, and Solomon was giving us this application of knowledge with godly wisdom. And I think this is coming to us at a very important time, because it's lacking in our world today, no doubt about that. And even more specifically, at this exact time when there's somewhat of chaos going on, when people just aren't using their brains. And I know it's kind of a hot topic, and we're probably going to, I won't say dance around the subject matter, because it's one of these subjects that no matter what you say, you're probably going to get some flack from somewhere. But I think as we study through Proverbs, if you really study it, you're probably going to see how appropriate these words are. And you've got to study it with an objective attitude, not with your own bias, but objectively study it and see how it really is applying with that. So if you can do that, I invite you to join us with this study, and not with just, oh, here we go again through Proverbs. The neat thing about Proverbs is that you can take one or two verses out of context, which I normally don't advocate, and still get some significant wisdom out of it that we can apply. Now, it's always best to do it in context, but there are some snippets that you can pull out and see how they apply today. So with that being said, let's jump right in. Today we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 1, and we're going to be in 7 through 19. Now, we're not covering verse 1 through 6 in our Sunday school material, but let me just share with the verses 1 through 6. It's giving us the purpose of the Proverbs, and telling us that this is good in things for knowledge of discretion when to the young, in simple things and hard things. It's just letting us know that the wisdom given in these Proverbs, what application we have in them. And then begins with verse 7, which your Sunday school lesson handles verse 7 all by itself. So let's read that. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Your Sunday school lesson handles this by itself because basically it's telling us, before we get into all the wisdom that we're going to gain from these proverbs over the next few weeks, there's a requirement. The very beginning requirement before you can go any further is we all have to agree that we must fear the Lord. Now, the word fear, again, this is one of those things that we've studied a lot here. Fear can have many different meanings, and specifically this word for fear, the Hebrew being yirah, can have the meaning of dread. And again, I want to reiterate, it's the same exact word. So in Deuteronomy, it has the word, the meaning of dread. In Jonah, it has the meaning of being terrified. In Kings, it has the meaning of awe. In 1 Kings and in Leviticus, it has the meaning of reverence. So I don't want to give the misconception of, well, this is the type of fear that's just reverence. This word, yirah, has the meaning of all of those depending on the context of it. So really, I think your Sunday school lesson does a good job of using the phrase reverential submission as the meaning of this word. So it encompasses all of those feelings. So it's standing in front of God saying, I submit to you because I know of your great power. And in that phrase, it encompasses all of those, the dread, being terrified of him, being in awe of him, and still having just that reverence of him as well. So in order to gain the full wisdom of all of this literature that we're reading, the requirement is that we must all agree to have this reverential submission to him. Otherwise, none of this is going to make sense. I don't know that somebody off the streets that does not believe in God would read these scriptures. In fact, I know that they wouldn't read the scriptures in the same way. In fact, many would disrespect the scriptures, and in subsequent fashion, they would read this and go, this doesn't mean anything. Unlike us, if we have that reverential submission for God, we sit there and go, oh, this makes total sense. And then we can soak all the knowledge out of the scriptures. So it's a starting point, as your Sunday school lesson uses as a title to this. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but those that are fools, those that are literally idiots, they despise wisdom, experiences, teachings, and instruction. They despise the discipline that it takes to go through and listen to the words that God has to teach us. There's a difference between those that take God's word and those that don't. You've seen those people that are incredibly intelligent and unwise at the same time. How can you be so smart and dumb at the same time? And I'm not talking about people that lack common sense. That's just an inability. I'm not talking about that incredibly book smart person and one that doesn't have common sense. I'm talking about somebody that is incredibly intelligent but not teachable. That is the person that is the fool. And maybe if you think real hard, maybe you know a person like that. They have the ability to learn. They're intelligent. They just refuse to do it. That's the fool, the one that refuses to listen and listen to what God is willing to teach them. In order to gain the wisdom, in order to gain the knowledge that is in God's Word, that you not only have to be intelligent enough to read it, you have to be intelligent enough to submit to what God has in store for you. And some people aren't willing to do that, and God calls them an idiot. And I use that word in the strongest sense. In fact, the Bible teaches us that they lack the ability to have a relationship with God, which is basically sad. Proverbs 1, 8 through 9 says this: Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adore your neck. So now Solomon moves on to, now that you have the prerequisite to learn, a couple of things that you need to learn first is to listen to your parents. Listen to, and he very well could have been talking to all of his sons, or he could have been talking to specifically to Rehoboam, the son that would become king. Either way, he's saying one of the things you need to do is listen to your parents. Specifically, the son should listen to the instruction. The same word for instruction he uses here is the same word that was used in verse 7. So he's talking about very specific things, the discipline that the father would give. And when he says listen to your mother's teaching, it's talking about the word for Torah. So a very powerful word that would have been used in the Israelites' history. And he says, if you do this, well, not if, it's a command. So he says, listen to these things and listen to them all the days of your life. You listen to them, it's going to be a garland on your head. This is a garland would have been a something of victory, something that you would have won in a race. If you listen to these things, it's going to be something of a sign of victory, a blessing. And the same thing with, the NIV says chain, but some versions use the term pendant, like a medal for somebody in the Olympics or something. So two signs of victory and honor. You'd have a garland around your head, or a wreath. Some versions say wreath, and a pendant or a chain around your neck, both indicating victory, honor. If you listen to your parents and listen to their teachings and their instruction, but again, going back to verse 7, the first thing you have to do is be submissive to God and listen to them. Not the parents first, but to God first. And if you do that, then the first thing you're going to do is listen to your parents. This is totally in line with going back to the 10 Commandments, where you first listen to God in the first 4 commandments, and then honor your father and your mother, which is the 5th commandment. So this would have been biblical teaching that Solomon was passing along in line with teaching back from the days of Moses. So this shouldn't be a surprise, and it shouldn't be a surprise to us either. This would have been seen as a blessing to those that listened. Most of us, if we're willing to admit it, would see the teaching of our parents as a blessing. Now, I realize not all of us have great parents, and maybe mediocre parents. I don't know. But a blessing nonetheless. Dylan and Sadie and I were working on the baptistry this last week, and we were just tinkering. In fact, I got one of the pieces sitting right here on my desk. This reminded me of it. And Dylan was sharing with me that there's a thing on YouTube or YouTube channel or something that a father or a guy has come up with to teach people how to do handiwork things around the house, because some people didn't have a dad to teach them how to do things. They didn't have that blessing of a father because they didn't grow up with one. Whether their father died or they were in prison, it didn't matter the reason why they didn't have a father. The fact is they didn't have a father. They didn't have the blessing of that teaching. And so he came up with a YouTube channel to show them how to do little things, because he did have somebody, or he didn't have that. He didn't have that, and because of that void, he chose to share that with somebody else. because it is a blessing. Solomon was saying it's a blessing to be able to teach you, either his son, all of his sons, or Rehoboam, or whatever. We have that privilege to teach and to listen, depending on where you're at in your life. And Solomon is saying that very thing here with verses 8 and 9. Verses 10 through 14. Again, he says, my son. This is the main focus of these sections. My son, it's if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood. Let's ambush some harmless soul. Let's swallow them alive, like the grave, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us. We will all share the loot. After trying to convince his son to listen to the parents for their godly wisdom, he immediately gives him some practical advice of who not to listen to. You know, as a parent, one of the biggest pieces of advice you want to give to your kids and to your grandkids is make sure you know who you're listening to. Now, you hope they always listen to you, but you know that's not true. They're not going to. But the next best thing would make sure you know who you are listening to. So Solomon's doing that very thing. He's saying, if men try to entice you, make sure that you don't give in to them. Make sure you don't listen to them, even though they're going to make it sound very good. In verse 11 again, it says, if they say, come along with us. You know, they're not saying you have to come with us. They're making it sound enticing. You know, just come along with us. Listen to what we're going to do. And while they're very brazen about it and saying we're going to ambush a harmless soul, the next few words make it sound like we're going to get something out of this. In verse 13, we'll get all sorts of valuable things. We'll fill our houses with plunder. We'll cast lots to share the loot. We're going to divide it up. Everybody's going to get something out of it. So they're making it sound really, really good. In all of this, Solomon's trying to pass along the wisdom that our actions, no matter how enticing they sound, are going to affect others. So, two big points. Make sure you're not around people that you don't need to be around. And number two, our actions have consequences on others. We have to make sure, no matter our age, that those two things are remembered. And with experience, we understand that. Sometimes we fail to follow through with that, but we still understand that. Make sure that who we hang around with are still good people. We don't hang around the wrong people. But number two, our actions have effects on not just us, but those that are around us. You know, there was a good story or a good thing on Facebook this last week, and I'm going to probably chop it up into little pieces because I quote it wrong, but I was just thinking about it when I was doing my Bible study, and it was a father trying to give advice to his son. I don't know if he was passing away, you know, it's just a cute little story, but he had an old watch that he was going to give his son, and so he told his son, take this old watch, it's been handed down generations, take it to the jeweler and see how much it's worth. So he took it to the jeweler, and the jeweler said, I'll give you $150 for it because it's old. And so he brought it back to the dad and said, $150. So the father said, take it down to the pawn shop and see what they'll give you. And he brought it back and said, Dad, they'll give me $10 for it because it's broken down, it's not worth much. And so the dad said, take it down to the museum and see what they'll give you for it. So he took it down to the museum, and the curator at the museum said, "I'll give you $500,000 for it because it's unique, it's special, it's one of a kind. I'll give you $500,000 to make it part of our collection here at the museum." So he brought it back to the dad, very surprised, $500,000. The dad said, "Let that be a lesson to you. Don't hang around the people that don't know your value. Don't hang around the people that will judge you by your looks. Hang around the people that value you the most for what you're worth." I think God is telling us the same thing with verses like this. Because the people that we hang around, the people that we encourage our kids and our grandkids to hang around, they're going to put value on us and in how we treat them and how they treat us and what we do for them, what they do for us. And then out of that, our actions have an effect. And we have to be very careful. And it starts from day one. So Solomon knew that, and he was trying to teach his kids, and one of his kids being future king, don't be enticed by words. Don't be enticed by people that are evil. Stay around the people that value you. First, verse 7, God. Verse 8 and 9, his parents. And then 10 through 14, talking about people that were leading astray or could lead him astray. I think that teaching hasn't changed a bit. Let's finish up with verse 15 through 19. It says, "My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into evil. They are swift to shed blood. How useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it." This continues the idea of those that are trying to entice and lead you down a path, but it speaks more to those people specifically. He's already told him in verses 10 through 14 to stay away from them, but in 15 through 19, he's saying don't go along with them because here's their future. They're going down a path that leads to destruction, and you're going to have to keep your feet. What does he says? He says, verse 15, "Do not set foot on their paths." That's an imperative. So it's don't do it, but also he says don't go along with them. That's an imperfect. So there's this idea that you're going to have to keep turning them down because what they're on is a path that leads to destruction, and it's like they don't know it. They're oblivious to it. And here's kind of where I was going in the very beginning when I said that this applies, I think, today just as it did back then, and it might hit on some controversy, but if we're objective about this, I think this is why God's word is so important. I believe with all my heart there are people on the path of destruction today that know they are, and they're just well aware of it and they don't care. But I also think there are some people that are on the path to destruction, being led astray, unaware, and they need to be alerted to it. I'm worried about both categories, but especially those that are being led astray and are unaware of it. And that's the category that's being spoken of here. They're going down a path and they're blinded, I think is a word that your Sunday school lesson used. And they're self-destructing. And they're so deep into that self-destruction that they can't see it. Because if they're going down this path and they're only surrounded by people that are going down that path as well, they can't see it. Think about somebody that's addicted to drugs, and all they're doing is hanging out with people that are drug addicts themselves. They see it as a norm. So they don't see that it's a problem. Uh, People that are swallowed up in debt, up to their eyeballs, and all they do is hang out with people that have that same problem. They don't see it as a problem. It's hard to change your ways when all you're doing is hanging out with the people that have the same problem. And the reason I use those examples is because sin is sin. And whether it's language, whether um, it's cursing God literally, um, it's pornography, it's adultery. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're hanging out with the people that are involved with it, you're not going to see that it's a problem. You're going to think that's the norm. So the question then becomes, how can we warn against folks in this type of behavior? Number one, how can we prevent our own behavior in this if we're in it ourselves? And number two, how can we warn against it with people that are in that type of behavior? Because wisdom teaches us that we're not to be in it. But if we're worried about those that are involved in self-destruction, which I think we have a lot of it right now, given what's going on in our nation, how can we warn against it and still hold true to the wisdom that is God's literature? That's a tough question. And I think it's one that we have to think about seriously if we're going to be God's people. The very last line of verse 19, I think, says why it's so important that we do it. It says, it takes away the life of those who get it. It will absolutely suck the life out of those that are involved in it. It'll suck the life out of those of us that understand it and see it happening if something doesn't change. And that's my concern. Wisdom teaches us that God created us to worship Him. And anything that takes away from that is not wisdom. Anything that does not fear the Lord first is not wisdom. So we've got a lot of praying to do for our country and for each other. So let me pray for you, and then we'll continue our study through Proverbs. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your word and for the truth that it is even now. Father, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you see the future from so many years ago when this was written, other than the fact that you are God and we are not. I just ask you to continue to watch over our country, to watch over our people, each and every one of us, as we continue to move forward and as we continue to pray. And I ask this in the mighty name of Christ Jesus. Amen. Look forward to seeing you next week. Don't forget, we're still worshiping here on Sunday mornings. If you feel comfortable, I'll see you here on Sunday at 11 o'clock. God bless you. See you soon.